Welcome to Lesche, a podcast on new ideas in ancient Greek studies. I'm your host, Johanna Hanning, and I'm a classicist at Brown University. As anyone who has read any ancient Greek tragedy in Greek knows, the choruses can be terribly difficult. I have a favorite anecdote about this. George Ticknor, who was born in Boston in 1791 and would go on to become one of the first American academic Hispanists, was also one of the first Americans to ever receive a PhD. He earned it from Göttingen, and in his memoirs, he records this anecdote about his time there. He writes, "When I was in Göttingen in 1816, I saw Wolff, the most distinguished Greek scholar of the time. He could also lecture extemporaneously in Latin. He was curious about this country and questioned me about our scholars and the amount of our scholarship. I had told him what I could, amongst other things, of a fashionable, dashing preacher of New York, having told me that he took great pleasure in reading the choruses of Aeschylus and that he read them without a dictionary. I was walking with Wolff at the time, and on hearing this, he stopped, squared round, and said, 'He told you that, did he?' 'Yes,' I answered. 'Very well. The next time you hear him say it, do you tell him he lies and that I say so.'" I've told this story a couple of times to my Greek students. Even Wolff thought Aeschylean choruses were really, really hard. And yet, I think it's also really important to resist the temptation that many of us intermediate Greek instructors face and allow the students to simply skip the choral odes. Tragic choruses, after all, contribute more than just odes, and excising the chorus from a tragic text is much easier said than done. As my guest for this episode, Rosa Andújar, reminds us, a chorus is often knotted up tightly in a play's action. You can't just make a few snips here and there and expect to remove all of it. In her new book, Playing the Chorus in Greek Tragedy, Rosa shows how often and how important it is that Greek tragic choruses did far more than sing self-contained odes in unison. They sang with the actors. They also dialogued with the actors and interrupted the actors. And the choruses themselves divided and multiplied and swarmed on the stage. In other words, they were much more and much messier than the static, meditative presence imagined by Hegel, or the ideal spectator as defined by Schlegel, or the tidy living wall that Schiller saw as separating the real world of the audience from the dramatic world of the play. Those are the kind of 19th century German abstractions that have entered into the bloodstream of our field, leaving the general impression that the chorus is a predictable, unified entity that stayed safely out of the way of the plot. But as Rosa shows, the reality on the ground is much more complicated and much more interesting. You really can't box the chorus in, not even to the physical space of the orchestra, which also means that you really can't take them out, no matter how hard those odes can be. Rosa Andújar is Associate Professor of Classics and Ancient Studies at Barnard College of Columbia University. She has published widely on Greek drama in its 5th century Athenian context, as well as on its modern global reception, particularly across the Americas. She is the author of Playing the Chorus in Greek Tragedy, which came out with Cambridge in 2025, and the editor of the Greek trilogy of Luis Alfaro, which came out with Mytho and Drama in 2020 and won the 2020 London Hellenic Prize. Just a quick note that, as ever, I've put a few references in the show notes for this episode. Remember, too, that Lesche is on Instagram at Lesche Podcast, and that's where I post announcements about new episodes, so if you're on Instagram, you might want to follow us there. Now, I'd like to welcome into the Lesche Rosa Andújar. The next voice you'll be hearing is hers.
So the book has, I think, two general points of origin. So the first, I would say, obviously, is that it is related to my PhD dissertation, which I wrote at Princeton, which was studying lyric exchanges between chorus and actors in Greek tragedy. The material in chapter 4 is taking up or has completely evolved from my dissertation. But in general, I would say that the actual or the real origin story of the book came from an experience that I had back in 2004. So I performed in the Cambridge Greek play that year, which is a play that they put on every 3 years in Cambridge in ancient Greek. It's to date, the only time I've ever performed in a drama. And I was in the chorus of the play of Oedipus Rex. So the play was wonderful. I mean, obviously you're doing it in ancient Greek, but it benefited from it was a professional production, and it had a professional director who was Annie Castledine, who's was one of the great British theater directors at the time. We had a professional choreographer who was Shona Morris, who's someone who trained in the Lecoq method and was really interested in thinking about specifically blocking the chorus and thinking about choral movement in particular. And I experienced firsthand how frustrated they were with the chorus. And we in the chorus, as well as performers, were ourselves quite frustrated in terms of no one was really sure what we were supposed to be doing. Oedipus Rex is a play that, especially towards the end, has multiple interactions. There's sort of these convoluted conversations happening where the chorus is occasionally interjecting, or let's say something dramatic, something would happen on stage, like Jocasta would rush off the stage, and there's a line from the chorus kind of noting the fact that she's rushed off. And so we had a lot of trouble, I think, for just trying to get our heads around the play, trying to figure out what the chorus was doing. So what I mean by I guess this is a real origin story. That experience has stayed with me, I think, since, over the decades now. And it was partly that experience that influenced the choice of my dissertation topic. Now, I should say that my dissertation only was interested, I guess, in what I then called in this book interactivity, or the chorus's interactive dimension. So looking at the ways in which the chorus was interacting with actors. But since I've published my PhD in the intervening decade, I'll say, or sort of last 15 years, I have met with multiple frustrations when it comes to teaching tragedy. And they're all around the chorus, not just teaching tragedy, but also I have been involved with a number of modern productions of Greek drama and adaptations where, again, everyone is meeting these frustrations around the chorus. And I would say that, I mean, for me, as I was involved with, again, teaching and, let's say, advising plays, it felt to me that part of the frustration with the chorus is that everyone had this idea of the chorus as a static thing. They're kind of standing around, they're offering maybe some kind of gnomic response to they're providing a mythical context. They're responding to what's happening in front of them, but they're not doing much else. And for me, I felt that in sort of a fuller account of ancient choral performance was needed. I've been excited by the ways in which scholarship on Greek drama has evolved in all these different directions to incorporate lots of different types of critical approaches around, I don't know, let's say phenomenology, the senses, but the chorus is almost always left behind. And so I was just thinking about the ways in which we need to think more broadly about choral performance. So for me, I went back to what I did with my dissertation, and I felt that interactivity was only one aspect of the many things that the chorus could do. I mean, obviously they're singing odes, and that is something that I do talk about in the book, but I kind of wanted to think about other categories of activity or other, say, choreographies that they do. And as I've been always reading and thinking about Greek tragedy, I was drawn to the fact that many commentaries sometimes highlight commentaries on particular plays, what are seen as unusual or exceptional choral activity. And so these labels tend to come up when you see the chorus being divided, or there's a secondary chorus or second choral group that's being brought on. So all of those things, I think, eventually sort of kind of coalesced into a bigger picture, or sort of a bigger, more exciting possibility for choral performance.
You write about how the chorus has been theorized and almost kind of considered a problem historically. And maybe I could start by asking you why you think it is that even in antiquity, even in classical Athens, at a certain point, the dramatic, particularly both the tragic and the comic chorus, I mean, it seemed to be like a problem. Eventually we get transmitted papyri where it just says choral song goes here. But even before that, I mean, Aristotle doesn't talk about it in the Poetics. So what's your take on the way that the chorus was perceived even within its own context at a certain point, at least, after a certain point, at least?
Yeah, this is a fascinating question. I think when it comes to thinking about classical Athens, I mean, the chorus was a part of the fabric of the city. I mean, it's involved in a number of institutions to do with, obviously, education, to do with theater and the fact that the theater, the whole production for a play was financed by the state is something that I think obviously we were interested in, but we can't quite grasp. I mean, I think choruses were everywhere. Now, in terms of them being a problem, I think they start becoming a problem in the 4th century. Aristotle is not interested in the chorus for whatever reason. And I mean, I can't say why. I mean, he's so forthcoming about so many different things. But when it comes to sort of labeling parts of tragedy or expounding on the chorus, it's quite shocking how little detail he provides. And I think part of the reason why we have in modernity, we have faced this issue or have inherited this idea of a static chorus is partly comes from Aristotle and his neglect of the chorus. Now, various other people have drawn attention to this. I think even Stephen Halliwell in his book on the Poetics talks a lot about the neglect of the chorus. And many folks who are interested in choral performance or even tragic performance have drawn attention to this fact. So the problem of Aristotle, I can't explain why. Maybe it was because the chorus was everywhere. It was so pervasive. Maybe it was so cultural, so ingrained in Athenian classical culture that it didn't bear explaining. What I am interested in my work, and this is something that I end up doing quite a lot in my book, it's not just that I'm offering you an account of ancient choral performance as can be seen in the ancient texts, but it's also untangling the critical traditions from Aristotle onward that devalue the chorus. So part of the reason why we have inherited these static perceptions are because also we have ourselves been influenced by a range of critical traditions on tragedy in particular, starting from Aristotle, also thinking about various German scholars in the 18th and 19th century who themselves were also not interested in the chorus, or were at least interested in different dimensions of tragedy that left the chorus behind. So part of the project, I think it's really crucial for me. And this is why this book has been a product of over a decade. I've been working on this book for many years and it has evolved in so many different ways. In my dissertation, I could not take on all these critical traditions. So I was interested, as I said, I think for my PhD, thinking about the chorus's interactive dimension and looking at lyric dialogues. But that didn't partly explain all the frustrations I had been facing as a teacher and also working with many folks in the theater world nowadays who are interested in tragedy in all of its fullest wonderful aspects. So that's just to say that the crucial work of untangling these critical traditions and how we ourselves have been influenced by them, it was something that was crucial to me in the book. And thinking about how, so some people the Germans are really interested in thinking about the wholeness of antiquity, and treating the chorus as a unified whole becomes kind of a casualty of these, of that priority that they had for thinking about wholeness.
Yeah, could you say a little bit more maybe about the received wisdom, these critical traditions that just became kind of like ossified, I think, within the discipline until fairly recently, relatively speaking. Could you just say a little bit about those traditions, especially the ones that you found particularly frustrating?
One of the most important and I think influential critical traditions to do with tragedy comes from the world of the 18th and 19th century Germans and various folks, but most prominently someone like Hegel, who talks about tragedy and a particular political vision of tragedy that has been hugely influential. So in my coda, I give an example. This is on page 281 of my book. I end with a quote from Hegel's Phenomenology of the Spirit, where he describes the impotent role of the chorus, and in particular, inability to interfere in the action. And he says, "It is the commonality in general, whose wisdom finds utterance in the chorus of elders. In the powerlessness of the chorus, the generality finds its representative, because the common people itself composed merely the positive and passive material for the individuality of the government confronting it. Lacking the power to negate and oppose, it is unable to hold together and keep within bounds the richest and varied fullness of divine life." Now, Hegel and many other thinkers operating at that time were interested in heroic individuals and in their agency. So they were interested in actors, or not actors, but tragic characters who they see as possessing political agency and self-consciousness. And what happens is they always use the chorus as kind of the foil to that. I mean, the chorus becomes this sort of unnamed crowd that is static, inert, and incapable of taking any significant action. And I think that political vision of tragedy has been hugely influential in the modern world, and especially across the 20th and even now 21st century. There's a huge tradition of folks thinking about tragedy from political philosophy. And what I've always been frustrated by the ways in which the chorus is kind of left behind. There are so many things that I think the chorus does, even in the surviving 33 plays that we have, there's a lot of possibilities for the chorus and the chorus does engage in dramatic action and can contribute to fascinating debates about political life in Athens. But when it comes to this model, I think the interest was always in the individual, right? And so the collective became a foil. So that's just to say that that's one of the many things that I've had to sort of navigate. It's tricky terrain because I myself am very interested in ancient choral performance, but I have to wade through all these sort of critical ideas that are hugely influential that even folks in the theater have in the back. I mean, they don't necessarily understand that some of their ideas about the static chorus are influenced by, say some of these debates that they may have heard in general lectures and general thinking about tragedy. So a few of my chapters have to engage very directly with some of these ideas. And I do this more in sort of chapter 1, thinking about this notion of fragmenting the chorus. It's not just a simple exercise of thinking about how the chorus divides. In various commentaries, you come across commentators talking about how unusual these things are because in the back of their heads, they have this idea of a unified chorus.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about your chapter, the fragmenting the chorus. So maybe you've gestured toward it, but could you maybe just say again, what do you mean by fragmentation? Because this is something that then troubles the notion, the idea of the chorus just as this monolith, that completely collective, unified voice. So what is fragmentation and how common is it within the plays that we have?
So I use this label fragmentation to talk about the various divisions that can occur in extant Greek tragedy. And by divisions, I mean the most common type are the chorus is divided into small groups. And these are called semi-choruses or half choruses. They have multiple labels, but for the sake of convenience, I call them semi-choruses. So for example, there's the opening of the Trojan Women, right? So the Trojan women have been enslaved. They're in the camp of the Greeks. Hecuba is lamenting in that play. The chorus, when they enter on stage, they're actually coming in from the stage building. They come in groups. They appear divided. And the parados is done as, this is the opening song of the chorus, is done as a lyric exchange with Hecuba, but it's done in small groups, right? So the chorus is coming. So this is one sort of very prominent example. And we have this phenomenon occurs in various other plays, but there's the more unusual sort of type of division. And this is why it also helps explain why I called it fragmentation, is the moment in Aeschylus' Agamemnon when they are reacting to the death of Agamemnon, and the chorus's reaction to those offstage cries is to divide, to fragment into individual voices. It's a famous moment. I think many people, even beyond tragedy, sort of think and talk about it, because for many people, I mean, for folks in tragedy, it's what confirms that the chorus in Aeschylus' time consisted of 12 members. You can kind of trace 12 voices in that reaction to the death of Agamemnon. But politically, a lot of other people who are interested in those political dimensions of tragedy are seeing, say, the voices of democracy debating all these different things, all these different outcomes. So for me, those are the two prominent examples, right? So there's this idea of you can divide the chorus up into these 12 voices, into individual voices, or the more common thing that we find in surviving tragedy is these small groups. For me, I have grouped both of those things under this rubric of what I call fragmentation. And I'm interested I use the word fragmentation very deliberately. As I have said, I mean, I think in the book, I make clear that this is not just about tracing choral performance, but also contending with these critical traditions that have occluded these choral performances in the first place. And I use fragmentation very deliberately because for me, it's a productive word that also helps us to think about the valorization of wholeness. Since, say, the 18th century, the discipline is really interested in thinking about wholeness in this one way. And the byproduct of this valorization of wholeness is the idea that the chorus should always be unified, right? So what happens, because the discipline has valued this wholeness, in many commentaries, when you have semi-choruses appear, right? So this is the case, as I mentioned, in Trojan Women. It happens in Seven Against Thebes. It happens more unusually in Euripides' Suppliant Women and Orestes. Many commentaries talk about this as being an exceptional moment or unparalleled. And this is the other thing that I was also intrigued, and also what was really challenging about working with the chorus, is that very rarely do you have a more synoptic approach of the chorus. People are usually, are talking about because it's so difficult, and because people are always talking about the chorus in individual plays, or maybe at most in individual authors or playwrights. But and sometimes in those commentaries, when they talk about these exceptional moments of division into small groups, they might say, oh, this also happens in these other places. But it's always treated as the exception. And I thought, when thinking about my choreographies or my different choral categories that show at least a vision of dynamism beyond the static chorus, I thought, what would happen if we actually treat these moments together? If we're actually thinking, if our questions are not just so much about how exceptional or unusual these moments are, but if we start really thinking seriously about the nature of choral activity and what happens when we theorize these, if we start thinking more seriously about the choral role and how it is not dissolved or affected by this fragmentation. I start the chapter with a famous anecdote that comes from Plutarch, that it talks about Euripides instructing the chorus, and there is one individual member of the chorus who misbehaves, and Euripides calls him stupid or draws attention to this guy. So I kind of take that as a kind of a starting point. What happens if we think seriously about, if we sort of draw our attention to one solitary member of the chorus? What happens to the broader chorus? Does that impact our role? Does this impact, our understanding of the role or the nature of the chorus? So I was interested in kind of theorizing those different moments of division, whether the chorus breaking up into individual voices or in these small groups. Yeah, within these sort of broader questions about the choral role.
It's interesting how, again, even this ancient theorizing about the chorus can have created this interpretive hang-up or problem, because, I'm thinking of everything that Plato says, even like Lucy Jackson's work on the chorus in the 4th century, that the chorus is kind of military lockstep, right? This is like a fantasy that we get in these other authors, that itself is not reflecting what's actually happening in the plays, I think, as your study shows, but then affects this interpretive tradition. It's such an important, I think, point of instruction that, I was certainly taught, when I was taught tragedy, I was taught that the semi-chorus is unusual. And then you get taught that, and then maybe you're writing commentary on a play and you just kind of think, okay, this is received wisdom, so I'm going to say this comes up in this play I'm working on, so I'll just repeat that, and then on it goes. So I think it's a really fascinating chapter where I certainly had not realized how common it was.
Yeah. For me, part of the priority was I think there was value in grouping these allegedly unusual occurrences together. The same thing kind of happens in my second chapter as well. My second chapter is interested in kind of what I think is the converse of fragmentation,
right,
which I call augmentation. So again, in a few surviving tragedies, we have this phenomenon of a secondary chorus being brought on stage. And these are, again, unusual, unparalleled, exceptional occurrences. And I was, again, interested in thinking about what would happen. What is the impact of the notion of a chorus? How does that, viewers who are confronted with these multiple choral groups, how do they think, how do they see the chorus differently when it is literally doubled?
Could you maybe give an example of one just to kind of anchor the listener?
Let's see. My favorite example, it's one that people might not know, but it's one that I give an extended reading in this book. It comes from the Phaethon of Euripides. There has been a lot of great scholarship on it, and there is a wonderful commentary by James Diggle on it. So Phaethon is a play that it sort of dramatizes, it's on the myth of Phaethon. He's a person who is the son of the god Helios, who took the chariot of Helios and sort of flew too close to the sun and dies as a result. Let's just say that. So in this play, Euripides is staging that myth. He's interested in, I guess, in seeing what happens when you change a couple of vectors in that play. So in this play, it also happens. Euripides makes it so that it is Phaethon's wedding day. The day of his death is also his wedding day. I hope this is not a big spoiler alert for anybody. But also it appears from what we have of the play that Merops, who is the king of Ethiopia, thinks that he is his son, right? When he's actually the son of Helios. So there's also this idea of concealed paternity in that play. Anyway, for a fragmentary play, what's really fascinating is that we have quite a lot of choral lyric that survives. We have the parados of that play, and it's a beautiful, beautiful ode. The chorus, there's all this stuff about dawn and morning song. And I think also helps us remind ourselves of how they had no lighting. This is open air theater, so it's likely that it was probably the first play in a trilogy. So it's probably taking place first thing in the morning. So you have this beautiful choral song where the chorus is singing about dawn, but towards the end of it, they're talking about how wonderful it is that it's this wedding day. They're very much looking forward to singing the wedding song for Phaethon, right? So guess what? Of course, Phaethon takes a chariot. He dies. His charred corpse is brought to the stage. And we have another fragment that talks about this moment when his mother sort of sees the body and the chorus is there on stage. But suddenly they note the fact that Merops is coming in with a chorus of virgins, or was coming with a group basically to celebrate, to initiate, I think, the celebrations for the wedding. And you have this wonderful scene where they're talking about what to do with the body. The decision is made to hide the body inside so that Merops doesn't know that he is dead. And you have this incredible scene where this other chorus comes on stage and sings a wedding song for him. And I talk about in my book, I mean, there's all these debates about whether the main chorus, who had sung that beautiful parados in the beginning, remained on stage. I think they do. And I think they are forced to witness this wedding song for a dead man. And so for me, I mean, there's a number of interesting things here, sort of from a performance perspective. And I think imagining an audience seeing this, first of all, you have the fact that the number of choral performers are doubled. You have two different choruses on stage. The main chorus, who is silent and is forced to witness this song by this wedding song that they themselves had wanted to sing in the parados. But not only that, but they're being forced to see or to witness this song at the most inappropriate time, when you actually have the groom who is dead. So instead of a lamentation, which is appropriate for the moment, you see this other, what I call in the book, a counterfactual reality, or I call it a kind of a mirror. And I think that's fascinating to think about in terms of the possibilities for the chorus. So I think the idea through a secondary chorus, Euripides is able to do so many fascinating things and to confront the viewer with all these different alternate realities. So that's my favorite sort of example of a secondary chorus.
Could I just ask you a practical question about it? So you think it was, would it have been 12 and 12, or would he have had, because if he was given a chorus, all of this stuff is so shaky, right? But do you have any sense of how that might have worked in practical terms?
Yeah. No, this is a fascinating question, and I'm glad you brought up the question of numbers. I talk about numbers. So we think that the chorus, the traditional view is that it was a chorus of 12 in tragedy, and then it eventually increased to 15. It is, I personally, I should say, I am more persuaded by the idea that it stayed at 12, because David Sansone wrote a fantastic article where he goes through all the ancient evidence, a lot of it which is also later than sort of the 5th century. And he argues that there was a confusion that arose also with the increase of actors. But so just to say, I myself am not, I am inclined to believe that it stayed at 12, but I do not want to, I am interested in these numbers, but I want to say that I'm not ultimately interested in exactly how many they were. From my perspective, what is really fascinating is that there is this group of 12 or 15 that is being confronted with another choral group. Now, there's a question of how many there were. However many there were, this extra chorus of virgins that's coming on to sing, I think it was clear from my perspective that the choral performers completely they take over the stage. They overwhelm the actors. So from my perspective, I think I'm much more interested in thinking about this as a choral, I call them a choral swarm. So whenever you have these moments of, with this moment is kind of strange because it's not clear whether the secondary chorus was another. number of equal. So they were another group of 12. But there were still, I think there was still a group.
Yeah, so you introduce as a term here, you use this word swarm, which Page Dubois has also written about in the context of comedy, and I think it's a really effective term in the context of your argument. Could you also maybe say a few words about your use of the concept of the specter in this chapter?
Yes. So just quickly to say on swarm, I mean, I was definitely influenced by Page Dubois, and the idea of using swarm, I think for me is very productive, even though I should also note that the word swarm, when it comes to a crowd, can also, has all these negative connotations. And I think it's important to think about, because there is a definite choral swarm in the ultimate play of migration, Aeschylus' Suppliant Women. You have multiple choral groups there. And it also coincides with ideas of thinking about ethnicity, thinking about migration. And there is a way in which swarm itself can be a negative view. But I am persuaded by sort of more recent usages like Page Dubois of sort of, using this term for a more dynamic and energetic crowd. And I kind of want to reclaim that. Now, I'm also interested in choral specter. So I should say that in general, when thinking about different choral groups on stage and secondary choruses, there was a book that sort of, in the few works of scholarship that have theorized or have thought about these secondary choruses, tend to divide or tend to sort of think about when they happen, or basically, does the second choral group happen before the parados? That is, do they appear first? And this is the prominent case in the Hippolytus. Euripides' Hippolytus. There is a group that comes on with him that sings a brief ode, and they go away. And then there's the main chorus then appears. So there's a question of, so the reason why, so they're interested in thinking about when this secondary chorus is brought on. Now, when the secondary chorus is brought on in the presence of the main chorus, this is when I start thinking, or I use this word swarm, because I am interested in, I guess, that broader impact of the choral performers sort of taking over the stage. When it comes to choral specter, so I was interested in these other moments, like in Euripides' Hippolytus, when you have a choral group that is not the main chorus being brought on stage first. Now, a lot of scholarship on this instance of secondary choruses appearing before the parados and before the main chorus, they tend to call them things like subsidiary choruses. They say things like, they are accompanying an actor, and so they are his attendants, or the actors, they're somehow grouped with the actor. And I think for me, some of the ways in which critics discuss these groups, again, it's also it kind of exemplifies the way in which the chorus is always being occluded, or their performance is being occluded, or the chorus itself is being devalued. Because I wanted to kind of just, from my perspective, every time a chorus comes on stage, and especially when they sing, I think choral song is always a significant event on stage. So even if in the example of the Hippolytus, there's this group that comes in and with Hippolytus is singing a hymn, right? That is a significant moment on stage. Now, most critics tend to just say, okay, this group comes in and sings, and maybe they're setting the religious atmosphere of the play, and then they go away, so we can forget about them. From my perspective, I think that these songs, so these secondary choruses that come on in the beginning, they sing a song, they haunt, or they have the potential to haunt the rest of the stage. And by haunting here, I'm thinking very deliberately about a lot of wonderful scholarship in theater studies that is thinking about haunting. Marvin Carlson. There's been a lot of other folks in Greek tragedy who've been thinking about ways in which, about hauntings. But for me, I think I call them specter because I think they influence, or at least set the tenor or an expectation in the audience that can haunt or affect their perceptions of the main chorus. So I thought it was productive to just categorizing all these different types of secondary choral appearances, but linking them to these productive terms, specter and swarm. I thought that that's sort of a useful way of at least highlighting all the many possibilities for dynamic choral performance.
Yeah, I think it was very effective here. I just want to give a brief shout out to our mutual friend Anna Ulig on this, with her work on the theatrical reenactment in Aeschylus and Pindar too. That it seems like such a generative kind of vein right now, the hauntology of these kinds of things. In terms of all of this kind of debunking of these myths, these scholarly myths about the chorus that have been transmitted for so long, maybe we could talk a little bit about your chapter on interruption. I mean, another thing where the chorus is somehow interrupted on stage or in the course of a production. And again, another thing that I feel like I was always just taught to think of as unusual or as something that you kind of sweep under the rug a little bit, or this is an anomaly. But again, you show that this happens way more than you might have expected. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, do you want to just maybe say a bit about the varieties of interruption that occur?
I was also interested in thinking about interruption as a productive category for kind of conceptualizing the different types of choral activity that can occur beyond just singing of choral odes. What I mean by interruption, I mean, I think there's a number. So first of all, there's a number of sort of, again, unusual choral activity, most probably that have to do with the chorus leaving the stage. So there are a number of surviving plays where we have an attested choral exit mid-action. So obviously, when it comes to most Greek tragedies, the chorus comes on stage in the Parados and they stay on the whole time. But there's a couple of plays where they leave for whatever reason. I mean, most prominently, the Ajax of Sophocles, right? So they leave the stage to search for him. And obviously what does that facilitate? The fact that you have that wonderful monologue from Ajax, and it's right before his suicide. I mean, dramatically, they can be quite effective and they can be really, really, they're necessary. But I was, again, interested in the ways in which they are labeled as unusual or extraordinary. So I was definitely interested in that as sort of a type of interruption. That's one of the things that I examine in that chapter. But I'm also interested in the concept. There are a couple of other things that I group under this sort of broader category of interruption. I was interested in silence or silences from different angles. So there are moments when I think the chorus is being told to be silent, or at least, there's a choral, there's an emerging choral ode is then transformed or interrupted or taken in a different direction. So I was interested in sort of actual manifestations of choral silence, but equally ways in which modern editors have silenced the chorus by deleting lines or taking lines away when they think that this is not in keeping with good choral behavior. And a lot of these assumptions have to do with this idea that the chorus is always only offering gnomic advice, or the chorus is only giving you a certain type of reflection. And I talk about a number of some of these examples where the chorus's bloodthirstiness comes into play. So for me, a choral exits mid-action, these silences. I also talk about the impact of offstage cries on choral song and activity. So for me, and this is a little bit trickier in conceptualizing interruption as a category compared to fragmentation and augmentation. Now, in talking about interruption, I think I group these things together as a way of also talking about choral conventions and expectations. Right. So the expectation, as I said, I mean, a chorus comes on stage in the Parados, they stay on, but there's also all these assumptions and these ideas about the chorus kind of being there in the background as kind of the engine of tragedy. So I was interested in these moments when I do think tragedians are deliberately playing with this idea of the chorus kind of always being there, being omnipresent. And they engineer certain scenes when the chorus leaves or their song is transformed or taken a different direction. So I thought it would be productive to bring these three different types of things together under the rubric of interruption as a way to showcase that obviously the vitality of ancient choral performance on the 5th century stage, but also to kind of expose once again, all the many presuppositions that we think that we have about the chorus and what we think what we assume they should be doing,
still on this path of these assumptions. In chapter 4, interacting with the chorus, there you debunk the myth of the Coryphaeus. And I was hoping you could say a bit about that, because yet another thing that we're taught that doesn't actually align with the evidence.
Absolutely. So the myth, I love the Coryphaeus, so the myth of the Coryphaeus. This is something that is definitely taught. It's still taught. I mean, it's still whenever, I don't want to name any names, but I have attended lectures and even various events where
I will out myself. I have taught this. Okay. So I've probably taught all of these things. So
yeah. No, but it's just so funny because I think this is the wonderful thing about, for me, obviously working on ancient choral performance, I just think that it's fascinating just to see how tangled everything is. And for me, it's been really challenging, but also a joy to kind of untangle some of these presuppositions and thinking of sort of tracing these things and see how far back they go. But the chorophase is one of these things that people are still talking about. And the assumption is that whenever the chorus speaks a line of trimeter, there is the head speaker of the chorus would just deliver it. Some of this comes from, obviously, the comedy. So I should say that the role of the chorophaios in comedy is much more defined. It's much more clear. The chorophaios in comedy is speaking in the parabasis, and all those wonderful moments in comedy when you hear about like the chorus complaining about how Aristophanes didn't win in this one festival and like lambasting all these politicians. When the chorus, I guess, breaks the fourth wall and the chorus leader is there speaking. So a lot of folks assume that you have this chorophaios figure in comedy. Clearly, there was also one in tragedy. And so because of that tradition in comedy where the chorus leader is speaking, must have been the same in tragedy. Now, the evidence for a lot of this stuff is late. There's nothing really, I think, in classical Athens that indicated that the tragic chorophaios operated in a similar manner to comedy. In fact, they're rarely ever distinguished. You don't get to see this idea of individual chorus members being highlighted in the same way as comedy just doesn't happen. So in comedy, a lot of sometimes you have choral members who are called out by name. It's the same thing in satyr play. You do not have that in tragedy.
So like comedy with like the differentiated chorus, like you think of the Birds or something like that.
Yes, exactly. But in tragedy, you do have that one moment in Agamemnon where the chorus does break up into these individual voices, but you do not get like this attention to choral, to the name of an individual choral member like you do in comedy and satyr play. Anyway, so the point is there's all these ideas about how things, are in tragedy operate like in comedy. But so for me, when it comes to performance, right, I was turning to moments in satyr play. So satyr play, what's fascinating about satyr play, and I really wanted to include that in this account of the chorus, because satyr play would have involved the very same performers as tragedy. So every tragic trilogy would have ended with a satyr play, where that same chorus of whatever they were in those tragic plays would have then transformed into a chorus of satyrs. And you have a couple of examples in satyr play where the chorus is singing and speaking sort of like in succession. There's all these sort of scenes. I know, yes, satyr play is a lot more lively and dynamic, and a lot of it is fragmentary, and it is challenging to trace some of these who is speaking and when. But you have examples, and in satyr play where the chorus is speaking and singing in succession, and there doesn't seem to be a differentiation or a need for like a choral, a chorophaios. To me, that just shows that it is possible for a chorus to sing and speak in unison. In satyr play, there's also the extra person of Silenus. It's this question of who he was and what his relationship to the chorus is, right, and whether he acted as some kind of choral headsperson. But when the chorus is speaking, and by the way, the manuscripts of Papyri always, whenever they mention a chorus, it's always chorus. It's not chorophaios. But the satyric chorus is able to do this, to speak and sing in unison. So to me, that's a persuasive evidence that it could have happened in tragedy as well. But also, we know that there was this extensive training that the chorus was doing from July to March. And so I think they were definitely capable of being trained to speak in unison. But from my perspective, and this is something that I examine in chapter 4 when I talk about interacting with the chorus, there's a number of lyric dialogues where you have the individual lyric dialogues that are shared between actors and chorus, where various things are being debated. You can think prominently, there's a lot of Electra plays that feature so many lyric dialogues. They're interested in talking or debating about mourning, and should we be mourning, and should Electra, is she mourning too much? And they are debating generally about whether lamentation should be happening. So for me, I'm interested in those moments when you definitely have an individual voice of an actor being juxtaposed with the voice of the chorus. And I think for me, having the possibility of the chorus sort of when they speak in trimeter, speak in unison as a group, I think that would be very effective when you have actors singing, to have those juxtaposition. So in the book, I kind of just review the evidence a bit. I talk about some of these examples, but I do think that, the evidence is very patchy. I may be wrong, but I just don't think that we should be discounting the possibility that the chorus spoke as a group. I also talk about, there's also later accounts about music and how it's easier to understand the single voice versus many. So I think as I said, I mean, I talk about in the book, all these critical traditions, all these ideas about what the chorus should or should not be doing, what is intelligible, what is not, get compounded and sort of mixed up and sort of carried over into modernity, and sort of this sort of interesting tangle of ideas and suppositions about the chorus.
Yeah, I mean, even just today, there are so many performance traditions around the world that you see them and listen and are so dazzled, and they're just so, the skill that they require is just so amazing that I'm sure that if you were to simply describe that performative art to someone who had never seen it, it would seem unbelievable. I mean, in this way that the chorus, it's I think it's one of those things that even today people say, well, there's no way that anybody could have actually understand them when they were singing like that. But I think it was just like you said, the training was so intense. We even know that people were taking performance enhancing drugs as part of the training. It was, we hear that. It is really just mind boggling. I think that your book just with each chapter just explodes all of this received wisdom again in this incredible way. And so I think that there's not only that about the book, that you just do a lot of clearing of brush that has grown up around these traditions and the scholarship over the centuries or millennia, but you also end by suggesting how some of these concepts that you talk about, fragmentations, augmentations, might actually also be useful for modeling the politics of group formation, particularly in the context of civic politics, in the context of the polis, in the context of the city, maybe even more broadly. Would you like to just say maybe a few words about your sense that there could be some implications for political theory here?
So I end by kind of thinking about the implications of some of my arguments and ideas about ancient choral performance, and thinking about in the political dimensions and these political traditions that think about and use tragedy. So I should say, I mean, so in the book, I mean, the book is, as you probably have gathered also from this conversation, I mean, it was a really difficult work in terms of sort of untangling all of these things. So I do want to think about or establish what was possible for ancient choral performance. But in order to do so, I have to kind of wade through all these different critical traditions. So wherever possible, and sometimes I think with some of my arguments, I get kind of tangled up or sort of outlining or thinking about these critical traditions and the scholarly traditions around them and the ways that commentators and critics talk about it. I do try wherever possible to think about the broader political dimensions, right? So just to say, for example, and I'll get to the to the coda in a second. So when I talk about Trojan women, the fact that the chorus appears in the beginning and the parados divided, I think it's significant that this is happening, obviously, at a moment of crisis for the Trojan women. They are enslaved, and it's no coincidence that Hecuba is herself also imagining or thinking about these earlier moments when they were unified, when they were singing these songs as a unified city, pre being enslaved by the Greeks. So there's this idea of civic unity there, that when you see the chorus now enslaved appearing in divided groups, like, I think just kind of shocks you or kind of drives the message home of what is happening at this moment of kind of political crisis. So wherever possible, I try to sort of tease out some of these ideas. I am very much interested in sort of these broader implications. But I just think that because I get so tangled up with unpacking these critical traditions and presuppositions, that sometimes I didn't have enough time in the actual analysis and discussion to fully explore some of their potential resonances or implications for the political sphere. So in my coda, I really sort of kind of outline some of these things. I start off, I mean, I talk about Hegel, I talk about these visions of the chorus as being sort of inert or incapable of taking political action, but there I kind of just gesture towards the ways in which I do think that many folks the choral metaphor is so powerful for many political readings. I should say, I mean, I'm happy to admit this. I mean, on my radar is the recent book by Ismard Azoulay on 403 BC, which I think in French is a choral history, but maybe perhaps in the English translation was translated differently.
Yeah, they got rid of the chorus from the title.
I know for so many people who are interested in thinking about 5th century Athens, who are thinking about political history, who are thinking about broader political categories, or just thinking about political agency and tragedy, are fascinated by the choral metaphor. And I think that the fact that we have looked at the chorus from this very rigid and static perspective has meant that people interested in the choral, in these choral metaphors, are themselves can't take it forward in all kinds of different and exciting directions. So I would hope that some of the things that I am unpacking here might inspire or might help folks thinking about the political dimensions of tragedy into thinking what was actually possible with these choral ideas. So for example, what I do say in terms of ancient choral performance, say about fragmentation, I think the tragedians were very much interested in thinking about individuality and collectivity in different ways, but also within the chorus, they themselves were in showcasing semi-choruses. And let's say the chorus of Agamemnon, the chorus bursting into individual voices. They were themselves interested in seeing how that drama of individuation and collectivity played out within the chorus itself. But the chorus continues to be the chorus. I mean, it's not like when we look at these individual voices in the Agamemnon, we suddenly think of them as like actor. I mean, they're still the chorus. So I think that they're interested in these sort of questions of individuality, collectivity, in different broad senses. So I think that folks who are interested in the political readings of tragedy or political philosophy, hopefully can be inspired or can see that these things can be seen in tragedy. And so I kind of sort of gesture towards some of these ideas in my coda about how to maybe potentially take some of this stuff forward beyond sort of my arguments about choral performance and critical traditions.
Well, Rosa, we've been ending each episode of the podcast this second season with a question for guests, which is, in light of the way the world is right now, I'm curious to hear what something you've been doing or listening to or watching or reading lately that has been bringing you some joy.
Ooh, wonderful question. So one thing that has brought a lot of joy recently is something that I've been watching with my kids, which is, I don't know if you know the reality TV series, The Traitors. So this is something that I think started in the UK. It's the BBC show. There is an American version, which has Alan Cummings as a host. I haven't seen I haven't seen the latest American ones, but the last series in the UK version just came out. And The Traitors, for those of you who are not familiar with this, it is a reality TV show, but it's like a live murder mystery. You have a group of people who don't know one another, who are put in the Scottish castle, and some of them are assigned as the traitors and the rest are the faithful. And they have all these different missions where they're trying to
I have read about this.
Okay. But what's fascinating to me, and this is something, and it's great because it's something I can watch with my kids. They have these round tables at the end of every day where they've been reflecting on everybody's behavior. And they're trying to really think about who are the traitors. Because the traitors every night are secretly murdering people. And
it's like Mafia meets Survivor or something, right?
Yes. But what I find fascinating, and I have to say for me, I mean, it brings joy because on so many levels, because it is just fascinating to see the psychology of this and how the types of things that people say to justify what they consider traitorous behavior. So I find that fascinating. But for me, it's also it is, I think of it as a choral activity, I guess. I mean, it's a huge group who are working together to different ends, and they kind of single out individuals in different ways. So I just love to see it from that perspective. But it is psychologically fascinating. You learn a lot about people. I should say one thing. I mean, my kids and I have watched some of the American series, and I do think this is they do use minor celebrities, and I think some of them know one another, and that kind of affects what I think is kind of the magic of the show. In the UK, they don't know each other. And so they're kind of trying to figure out what is acceptable or normal behavior just on the basis of a day or a few days of knowing one another. They did do a celebrity version just recently in the UK, they were terrible because they all know each other. And so they had no way of figuring out who was, and I guess a lot of them were actors, but there's so much joy just seeing people playing a game, playing a live action game. And so I
That's a great answer. It's a great rec. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Rosa, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Congratulations on the book, which I think is really going to change a lot within this corner of the field. But it was great to hear about it from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Lesche podcast. And special thanks for their support of the podcast to the Brown University Department of Classics and the John Nicholas Brown Center for Advanced Study. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And we'd be grateful if you take a moment to rate the podcast and leave a review. It will help other listeners to find us. We look forward to you joining us again soon here in the Lesche.